Imagine a city on fire, not just a building, but an entire city engulfed in smoke and chaos. Artillery shells scream overhead, machine guns chatter, and buildings crumble into twisted steel. This was Stalingrad in the autumn of 1942, a city of steel, now a city of fire and death. Here, the fate of the world was decided, not by generals, but by ordinary people trapped in a brutal struggle. Forget the grand maps for a moment. We're going down to the ground, into the ruins, to hear the whispers of soldiers in frozen cellars. This isn't just a story about armies, it's about people, Soviet and German, caught in the most brutal meat grinder in history. Their stories, hidden for decades, reveal unimaginable terror and incredible resilience. We'll stand with the defenders, their backs to the Volga, with nowhere left to retreat. We'll see the battle through the eyes of a young Red Army soldier, his world reduced to a few meters of rubble. We'll step into the boots of a German infantryman, once confident, now lost in a nightmarish urban landscape. This is a descent into hell on earth, but one we must take to understand the true cost of war. Stalingrad is often told as a clash of ideologies, a turning point on a map. But to truly grasp its meaning, we must look closer, listen to the voices long silenced. In the shattered streets of this city, we find the universal story of human conflict. Fear, courage, suffering, and the will to survive. This is the untold story of Stalingrad. It's a story that needs to be heard. Let's begin. Why did Stalingrad become the epicenter of such violence? To understand, rewind to the summer of 1942. Hitler, frustrated by his failure to take Moscow, turned south. His new plan seized the oil fields of the Caucasus. Stalingrad, straddling the Volga, was the gateway to this vital resource, a strategic linchpin, but it was also symbolic. The city bore Stalin's name, making it a personal obsession for Hitler. For Stalin, losing Stalingrad was unthinkable. It was a vital hub, and its fall would cut off the Caucasus and threaten Moscow. Both dictators poured resources and manpower into the fight, transforming the city into a vortex of destruction. Stalin's infamous not one step back order made retreat punishable by death. For the Germans, it was supposed to be a swift victory. For the Soviets, a desperate last stand. The city became a symbol, a crucible where two regimes clashed, with the fate of the war hanging in the balance. Stalingrad was no longer just a city. It was the heart of the struggle, and neither side could afford to lose. At the top stood two dictators, Hitler and Stalin, each ruling with absolute power, each obsessed with Stalingrad. Hitler, convinced of his own genius, micromanaged from afar, turning a military campaign into a personal crusade. Stalin, ruthless and unyielding, learned from past mistakes, and now gripped the Soviet war effort with iron resolve. Both distrusted their generals, but Stalin understood the power of Russian endurance. His not one step back order was brutal, but it made clear Stalingrad would be held at any cost. On the ground, their wills clashed through their commanders. General Paulus, methodical but indecisive, led the Germans, trapped between impossible orders and grim reality. Facing him was General Chuikov, a gritty brawler who embraced brutal close combat. Chuikov's tactic hugged the enemy, neutralizing German air and artillery superiority. He set up his command post in the heart of the city, sharing the dangers of his men. Paulus's loyalty to Hitler would doom his army. Chuikov's resolve would make him the rock against which the German tide broke. The battle became a test of wills, dictators, generals, and the soldiers beneath them. Stalingrad was no chessboard. It was a crucible of human endurance, and only one side would emerge. The battle for Stalingrad began on September 13, 1942, not with sweeping maneuvers, but with a crawl through ruins. The Luftwaffe had bombed the city into rubble, turning every building into a fortress. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, rat war. Every floor, every room, every sewer became a battleground. Chuikov's storm groups, small and agile, mastered urban warfare, moving through sewers, basements, and holes in walls. German tanks would pass, only to be ambushed by Soviet infantry lurking in the shadows. The front line was everywhere and nowhere, a building held by Soviets on one floor, Germans on another. Sleep was rare, food and water scarcer. For the Germans trained for blitzkrieg, it was a nightmare. Morale crumbled under constant sniper fire and sudden counterattacks. The city itself seemed to fight back, its factories and ruins becoming epic fortresses. In Stalingrad, war was reduced to its most primal elements: steel, fire, and survival. Amid the ruins, one building became legend: Pavlov's house. A simple apartment block, it offered a clear view over German positions and the Volga. In late September, Sergeant Yakov Pavlov and a handful of men seized it after a fierce firefight. For 58 days, they held out against relentless German attacks: tanks, infantry, mortars. The defenders, a mix of nationalities, turned the building into a fortress with mines, barbed wire, and internal firing positions. Civilians huddled in the basement, sharing rations and fear with the soldiers. Pavlov's house became a symbol of Soviet defiance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The story spread, a handful of men holding out against overwhelming odds. For the Germans, it was a fortress they couldn't crack. For the Soviets, it was proof that determination could hold back an army. Pavlov's house is more than a war story. It's a testament to resilience and courage. It stands as an icon, like the Alamo, of fighting to the last for home. In miniature, it was the battle for Stalingrad itself. The real story of Stalingrad lies in the voices of its defenders, preserved in letters, notebooks, and interviews. These testimonies reveal terror, exhaustion, and the desperate will to survive. A young lieutenant describes his first assault, a blur of smoke and fear. A nurse writes of tending the wounded by candlelight, with no medicine. Soldiers from every corner of the Soviet Union fought for many reasons, but mostly for each other. Bonds forged in combat held the defense together. Amid horror, moments of humanity emerged, sharing bread with prisoners, singing songs, dreaming of peace. These voices remind us, behind every statistic was a name, a family, a story. To understand Stalingrad, we must also see through the eyes of the German Sixth Army. Letters and diaries reveal confidence turning to despair. One officer survived Stalingrad, endured years in a Soviet gulag, and left behind memoirs that speak of arrogance, shock, and horror. Early letters home brimmed with bravado. By October they spoke of exhaustion, fear, and longing for home. The brutal Rattenkrieg, the cold, the hunger, these became daily realities. By December, after encirclement, letters were filled with desperation and farewells. Soldiers wrote of eating horses, then dogs, then rats, and watching comrades freeze to death. These are the voices of an army abandoned and dying in a frozen hell. Their suffering adds a tragic dimension to the story. Stalingrad was a catastrophe for both sides, and every letter is a reminder of war's true cost. While the Germans bled in Stalingrad, the Soviets planned a masterstroke, Operation Uranus. General Zhukov massed forces on the weakly held German flanks, manned by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allies. On November 19, 1942, Soviet armies smashed through, encircling the Sixth Army. The speed and scale stunned the Germans. Paulus, trapped, begged Hitler for permission to break out. Hitler refused, trusting Göring's promise of an airlift. The Luftwaffe couldn't deliver. The air bridge was a fantasy. On November 23, Soviet tanks closed the ring at Kalach. The hunter became the hunted, the entire Sixth Army surrounded. Operation Uranus was the true turning point, not in the city, but on the frozen plains around it. The siege of Stalingrad was over. The siege of the Sixth Army had begun. The end came slowly, then all at once. For 2 months the trapped Sixth Army withered in the Kessel, the cauldron. Starvation, frostbite, and disease claimed more lives than bullets. On January 31, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus surrendered. By February 2, the last resistance ended. Of 250,000 trapped, only 91,000 surrendered. Just 5,000 would ever see Germany again. Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility and marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. For the Soviets, victory came at a staggering cost. Over 1 million casualties, a city in ruins. But it galvanized the nation and became a symbol of sacrifice and unbreakable will. Today the echoes of Stalingrad remind us to look beyond grand narratives. The stories of Pavlov's men, voices from the archives, and final letters of German soldiers are the true fabric of history. They challenge us to see the human faces on both sides. The untold stories are the most important. We must seek them out, listen, and remember.